Welcome to Ave Maria in the afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. We're going to open by talking with our friend Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, to talk about church news and current events. And we're going to get to quite a number of pieces of key news, but some of the things we won't be able to talk about that I figure everyone ought to know is that South Korean priests are being put through artificial intelligence training, according to Asian News. Earlier this month, the South Korean diocese brought together priests from various cities, the cities of Suwon, Daegu, and Masan, to learn about the use of artificial intelligence tools in parish life. And the purpose of it was to give them extra resources for the work of, say, creating images, presentations, videos, even background music for parish activities, and experimenting with a chatbot that might be able to take meeting minutes. Now, this is really a human interest piece at best, but I think it also signals a tide of being willing to utilize artificial intelligence as the tool that it is, and to utilize it well, while still adhering to what we call the alignment of virtue in the exercise of utilizing those platforms. The other thing we won't be able to get to will be Pope Leo's insistence of immediate ceasefire after a recent deadly attack on the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza. This is the only Catholic church in Gaza right now, and it was unfortunately attacked by a tank of the IDF. We're still awaiting formal statements. And then for the remainder of the hour, we will speak with Mike Aquilina about St. Bonaventure. He's often called the Seraphic Doctor. He was this gargantuan figure in medieval theology, was also one of the key architects of the Franciscan intellectual and spiritual life. He defended the legacy of St. Francis of Assisi during a time of internal division, but his theological contributions are how we remember him the most, particularly his works in The Soul's Journey to God and his angelology, especially his writings on the Seraphim. Bonaventure harmonized scholastic rigor with mystical insight, and he showed that true knowledge of God is inseparable from prayer. All this after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Thursday, July 17th. It's the Feast of the Martyrs of Campania. Today's news brought to you by Ave Maria University. Your vocation location is at avemaria.edu. The Pillar is reporting that a Vatican priest convicted of child pornography has resumed work in the Holy See's diplomatic service. Father Carlo Alberto Capello was sentenced in 2018 to 5 years by a Vatican court for possession and distribution of child pornography. After completing his sentence, he was allowed to return to work in the Secretariat of State. Auxiliary Bishop Michael Pham has been installed as the 7th Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of San Diego. He's replacing Cardinal Robert McElroy, who transitioned to become the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. His installation marks Pope Leo XIV's first official appointment during his papacy. Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is calling for a special counsel to investigate the Trump administration's handling of files associated with Jeffrey Epstein. Chris Coraggio reports.
Boebert was one of the first people to call for an independent probe into the convicted sex offender's case. She noted that the American people are frustrated and want answers, while also stressing that it's important to devote the necessary time and resources to the investigation without losing sight of the president's victories. Boebert is one of several prominent Republicans calling for greater transparency.
Alcatraz may be back open as a prison at some point, although the White House has made no formal announcement. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's been informed of the event at the island that will highlight the plan to turn Alcatraz back into a federal prison.
This is not about being tough on crime. It's being frivolous about money and silly about the choices they have made.
Alcatraz, known as The Rock, has been closed as a federal prison since 1963. From your AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Joining us as he does every week is our friend, Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News. And we're talking about church news and current events in light of church teaching. Matthew, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Good to be with you. Heartbroken, like all of us are, over the what happened in Gaza.
Yeah, and I was going to open with asking you about that. It really is tragic. How much do we know other than what we most recently found out?
Yeah, as of this afternoon, it's been able to confirm, of course, that the Holy Family Church in Gaza, which is the only Christian church left in Gaza, the Catholic Church certainly, was hit by some kind of an attack by IDF forces, the Israeli Defense Forces. According to Patriarch Pier Battista Pizzaballa, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, apparently an Israeli tank was involved. Now, let's make immediate note of the fact that the Israeli ministry, I believe for foreign ministry, apologized for what happened and made the pledge, at least, of transparency in an investigation as to figuring out what did happen. So that's out there. Now, as of the most recent reporting, at least 3 people have been killed in that strike. Others have been injured. We're not sure exactly how many, each of them sustaining various levels of moderate to severe injury. And the parish priest, a name that may be known to many in your audience, Father Gabriele Romanelli, was struck in his leg with shrapnel. That injury does not appear to be particularly severe, as he was able to be bandaged up and then began, of course, taking care of and caring for the wounded and those who have been impacted by it. To be honest, based on the photos that we're seeing so far, and some of the footage, it is, I wouldn't say miraculous, but it is remarkable that there were not more injuries and fatalities.
Francis had a particular investment in the well-being of the parishioners of this church, and would you please tell us about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Pope Francis made it a point that whenever possible, he would call every day to see how things were going. He would make a phone call to Father Romanelli and extending his concerns and prayers for the parish community. And if I'm remembering right, one of the last phone calls that Pope Francis made prior to his passing the day after Easter Sunday and Easter Monday was to the Gaza parish, even though he could barely speak at that point. So it's a testament to his concern. We know that Pope Leo himself has issued a statement through the Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. Obviously, the language has to be very careful given the situation in the Holy Land. But he did 2 things I think that were notable. The first is obviously expressing his genuine sorrow upon hearing of the attack and the loss of life, but then also in conveying that closeness to the parish community, he called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza in the hopes of crafting and the 2 sides coming together to establish some sort of a lasting peace in the region. As we're seeing, of course, that's highly unlikely. So there's obviously the international ramifications of an incident like this, of an attack like this. But it's also a stark reminder of the severity of the fighting that's taking place across all of Gaza. And the tiny Christian community has been caught up in that. And it isn't just a small parish community. In fact, that we know that we're not sure exactly how many, but there are estimates of several hundred Catholics, Christians who have taken refuge in Holy Family Church. At least dozens of families, they've been sheltering there basically since the start of the war, what is now almost 2 years ago, in October of 2023. And this also, it's worth noting, isn't the first time that the church has been shelled or struck. In fact, we know back in July of 2024 that the church itself that the compound itself was shelled. At the time, it drew very significant complaints, criticism, and condemnation from all of the Christian leaders in the Holy Land. We're I'm certain that there will be similar expressions of outrage this time around, too.
And considering all of that, so you mentioned earlier the statement of the Israeli foreign minister. Do we have any statements from the IDF?
Nothing that I have seen in terms of social media, other than the pledge from the Israelis that this would be investigated, and the IDF has said that they're investigating it.
Okay.
But again, that's through the foreign ministry on X, which is one of the primary ways that they have for making immediate responses. So there is assurance that the IDF is looking into the incident. This particular statement was issued by Oren Barmerstein, who is one of the officials in the Israeli foreign ministry. And it went so far as to say that Israel never targets churches or religious sites and regrets any harm to a religious site or to uninvolved civilians. I'm sure that many would consider that to be less than satisfactory, the fact that it happened at all. But we'll have to see what comes in the next days. I know that Cardinal Pizzaballa also issued a statement today condemning the violence there and also begging for an end to the fighting. Yeah,
and to be sure, this has been called, the Patriarchate has called this a barbaric war, and they would love to see a cessation to this violence.
Yeah, what is notable in this, too, is the fact that the fighting continues, but we're not sure exactly what would be considered terms of victory. Everyone is hoping for some sort of a ceasefire. We know that there are still Israeli hostages in the hands of Hamas. We know that certainly the government of Benjamin Netanyahu is very much committed to continuing the war. But then you can throw in the potential instability of the government of Netanyahu, given the fragile coalition that he constructed. It's a wartime cabinet, basically. But as this has dragged on, there certainly has been some political fraying, and Netanyahu himself is not out of the political woods of danger, so to speak, given the number of investigations and things that have been ongoing relating to his government. So there are a lot of different moving parts. We can add in just the regional instability that we've been seeing. Certainly just a few weeks ago, I think you and I were talking about Israel and Iran engaging in what was a very significant, albeit brief, relatively brief, exchange of missiles and attacks. But we've also seen, too, that the Israelis have been very active militarily in trying to degrade some of the capacity for the new Syrian government, or some would call it a regime, the new government in Syria, in order to continue certainly what the Israelis see as this need strategically for their ongoing safety, given the presence of jihadists in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then the ongoing presence of Hamas in Gaza.
I'd like to switch gears, but we don't have a lot of time right now. Just opening up the conversation about the recent CARA research in conjunction with the Diocese of Saginaw about religious vocations.
Yeah, this is a very interesting report. You can find our reporting on it at the CatholicNewsAgency.com. The Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, or CARA, which is one of those great think tanks from Georgetown University, published a report, as you say, Impact of Mary, Mother of the Church on Ecclesial Vocations. And when you dig into some of the data are fascinating in the sense that 65% of the respondents, including diocesan personnel, including bishops, diocesan priests. But these are people who are deeply moved by this connection to the Blessed Mother, and we can pick this up a little bit.
Yep. My guest is Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News. We're talking about church news and current events, and we just started talking about how devotion to the Blessed Mother, private devotion especially, tends to influence one's discernment of a religious vocation. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Support for this Ave Maria radio program comes in part by the non-for-profit St. Anthony Services. Are you shopping for mortgage products, Catholic investing, Catholic health, real estate, or estate planning? StAnthonyServices.org can help you find a Catholic professional for these needs. They regularly connect faithful citizens with faith-based professionals that share our Christian values. More information at StAnthonyServices.org or 877-LIFE-US1.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. That's AveMaria.com.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Pete. I'm talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News. Matthew, we were talking earlier about how devotion to the Blessed Mother in general tends to help shape religious vocations, but one of the points that comes out of this CARA research is also the fact that private Marian vocations has a huge impact.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is really interesting to me when we talk about how you go about discerning a vocation, and this is true not just to the religious life or to the priesthood, but as anyone is trying to discern a vocation for their life, the importance of prayer. And certainly the Blessed Mother is a significant part of that. Mm-hmm. And the study found that with 59% of respondents that their devotion to Mary had either a meaningful impact or a great impact on their original sense of the vocation. But the other part that was so interesting to me is how many people found the private devotions, in other words, the saying the rosary, mm-hmm. as one of their primary ways of doing this. And of course, one hears all the time the importance of the rosary in our lives, or what should be the rosary. And I think this kind of a report really demonstrates that the most popular of the Marian devotions, obviously reciting the rosary privately, 7 in 10 of the respondents, in terms of those who discerned their vocation, said they were positively impacted by reciting the rosary privately. And when you get among bishops, it moves all the way up to 80%.
Yeah.
So this is not just a lesson for someone who's discerning, as I was saying, a vocation's religious life or the priesthood, but really in our own lives, just the importance and the power of Marian devotions and the rosary in particular.
Without exaggerating, if the surveyors had gone all the way up to the papacy, would the number be 100%? I suspect it would.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very safe assumption to make, certainly in all of the popes that I could think of.
Yeah, especially, the popes that we've known in modernity. So, as they talk about the meaningful impact, or at the very least the great impact of reciting the rosary privately, what the study at least shows is Mary's continued role as Mother of the Church and Mother of God in her intercessory role in guiding the Church's life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also an important understanding of the place of Mary in the life of the Church, mm-hmm. and in the lives of the faithful. And one other stat that really jumped out was that of all of the respondents in this survey, was that more than 75%, I think it was 77%, said that at least one Marian site or its related devotions had strengthened them, had really given them strength while living out their vocation. And that the three most commonly named were Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Lourdes, and Lady of Fatima. So the three biggest of the great Marian sites really do have the significant impact on those who have particular devotion to her under those appearances, but also those who had visited those sites. I mean, we all know that visiting Lourdes, visiting Fatima, visiting Guadalupe can be life-changing. Well, this is certainly the demonstration. But I keep coming back, too, to that added number that when we are talking about bishops, those numbers go up again. So in other words, 77% of the bishops who responded to the survey said that Our Lady of Guadalupe had a direct impact on them, 72% Our Lady of Lourdes. So we're seeing among bishops this particular devotion and dedication to the Blessed Mother. And I personally am very heartened by those numbers.
As am I, and frankly, a priest, or at least someone even discerning religious life, a man who prays the rosary is a man who has my confidence in at least being connected to a life of grace and fervor. And speaking of unifying within the life of the Church, Pope Leo and the ecumenical group that met at Castel Gandolfo, please tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is yet another encounter that Pope Leo has had with ecumenical groups, in particular representatives of the Greek Orthodox. He met previously with representatives of the ecumenical patriarch some weeks back. That was very fruitful. We know that, for example, on June 29th, for the solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, there was a delegation that also was with him down at the tomb of Peter. Now he just had an encounter with an ecumenical group, a U.S. group, in fact, that was led by two officials. The first is Cardinal Joseph Tobin, the Archbishop of Newark, who is one of the leaders of efforts at ecumenism in the U.S., and the Greek Orthodox Archbishop Elpidophoros of America. So this is a local effort, so to speak, a national effort that is coming to see him. And they had this great opportunity to meet him at Castel Gandolfo, essentially while the Pope, I wouldn't say he's on vacation because he's got a very full schedule, but he is very much aware of his desire and his efforts to promote unity among Christians. And he said something that was really interesting. He said that your pilgrimage is one of the abundant fruits of the ecumenical movement aimed at restoring full unity among all Christ's disciples in accordance with the Lord's Prayer at the Last Supper when Jesus said that all may be one. And we always go back to his own motto as a bishop and now as Pope, in Christ we are one. So I think this theme of unity is very significant and is increasingly one of the pillars of this pontificate. But let's also be clear that he has spoken very fervently on how cherished the Eastern Catholic churches are. So it's very obvious that there's no thought here that one would be sacrificed in the interests of improving ecumenical relations with the other.
Right. And so we're seeing a real powerful echoing of, especially the words of John Paul II, this language of breathing with both lungs. Could you please comment on how good a job he's doing at being Pontifex Maximus in this ecumenical dialogue?
Yeah, it's very clear that he understands the importance of ecumenism, the importance of unity, but he's also recognizing the legacy. We keep coming back to the stress on continuity. And in fact, he talks about the anniversary. Here we are, 1,700 years of the Council of Nicaea that we're celebrating. But he also went back to 1965, when at the very conclusion of the Second Vatican Council, Pope St. Paul VI and then Patriarch Athenagoras had this joint declaration, essentially removing from memory, he said, in the midst of the church, the sentences of excommunication that followed the events of the year 1054, when, of course, we had the start of the Great Schism that has continues to separate the Orthodox from the Catholic Church. But this recognition of what had gone before is allowing him to anchor what he's doing now. And sort of lost in some of the discussion a few weeks back was when he attended this very interesting ecumenical gathering. Mm-hmm. One of the things that was being discussed was a heightened appreciation of Eastern theology, in particular deification, so theosis, as is technically called. Yeah. And its role in our understanding of salvation. And I think that is one of those sort of subterranean, no one really thinks about it because it's such a complicated topic. You know, the average person looks at the concept of deification, they're not even sure if it's Christian, you know what I mean? In the sense that it looks pagan when you first see it, but you realize how important this has been, that deification, that theosis is among the church fathers. We see it in Athanasius, we see it in so many others, and how this heightened reappreciation of deification in the church fathers, which we have also seen in so many of the Nouvelle Théologie of Henri de Lubac and others, but how that can bring us together, and how that itself, theologically and spiritually, is another impetus, and Pope Leo sees that too.
Matthew, I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you for making the time.
Oh, great to be with you. Let's keep praying for Gaza.
Amen. My guest has been Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News. We've been talking about current events and church news. Please pray for Holy Family Church in Gaza as we share more with you as we find them out.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is. Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
Hello, Steve Ray here from Footprints of God Pilgrimages. Want to celebrate some amazing anniversaries this year in France? We'll visit Normandy Beach to celebrate our heroic military for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Also, the 100th anniversary of the canonization of St. Therese of Lisieux. Join us this October for our Saints and Shrines of France and a visit to the newly renovated Notre Dame Cathedral.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at avemariaradio.net.
Hi, I'm Father Chris Alar of the Marian Fathers of the Immaculate Conception. My new book, Understanding the Sacraments, unpacks the extraordinary gifts unique to the Catholic Church. Ever wonder why we baptize infants? Is confession in the Bible? And must wives be subordinate to their husbands? The answers to these more hot-button questions about the sacraments are on sale now from Marian Press at shopmercy.org. God bless you.
Why is prayer a battle? Prayer is both a gift of grace and a determined response on our part, the Catholic Catechism tells us. It takes effort. Who is the battle against? Against ourselves and against the devil, who does all he can to turn us away from prayer and God and union with God. If we do not live habitually according to the Spirit of Christ, we cannot pray habitually in his name. We pray as we live, says the Catechism, and we live as we pray. One of the most universal difficulties in prayer is distraction. The simple and most effective answer to distraction is to turn back to our heart, for distraction reveals to what we are attached. This humble awareness can prompt us to offer our hearts to the Lord for purification. This is Peggy Stanton, and this is the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popcak.
The Church teaches us that every Catholic family is meant to be a domestic church. That sounds nice, but what does it really mean? Well, a domestic church is a household of people united to each other and God through the sacramental life of the Church and committed to living out Christ's sacrificial love in their relationships with each other and the world. The degree to which your family already lives this vision is the degree to which your family already is a domestic church. And the degree to which your family struggles to live that vision is the degree to which your family is called to become a domestic church. Every Catholic household is a domestic church that's called to witness to the already present, but not yet fulfilled, kingdom of God. To discover more ways your family can celebrate the liturgy of domestic church life, check out the newest editions of Parenting with Grace and visit CatholicCounselors.com. I'm Dr. Greg Popcak, but you can call me Family Man.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Some days ago, we celebrated the feast day of Saint Bonaventure, and he was an Italian bishop, philosopher, theologian known as the Seraphic Doctor, a tremendous genius of a man, and contributed to a kind of mystical theological renewal of the Franciscan life. Joining me to talk about St. Bonaventure is Mike Aquilina, author of several books about the early church, executive vice president of the St. Paul Center, and contributing editor to Angelus News. He's also hosted 11 series on EWTN and appears weekly on the Sunrise Morning Show. Mike, it's great to speak with you again. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me back, Marcus. I'm doing fine. Hope you're well, too.
Oh, I'm very well, and always a joy to connect with you. Bonaventure, I want to open by asking your insight into why we don't seem to think of him and therefore know more about him as we do today.
You know, that is a mystery. I think because he's such a genius, and he really did shape the future course of theology. He was with Thomas Aquinas, a master at the University of Paris during this period of the High Middle Ages, and really the two of them together established this great system of scholasticism.
Right.
And they're different from each other. They're distinct from each other, and yet they're both necessary, I think, for the future of theology from that point forward. I think it's because he's overshadowed by his master, who is Francis. Right? He arrives in just the second generation after Francis had founded his order, and he's overshadowed by Francis, and he was willing to be that way. He was willing to submit himself to Francis's authority and Francis's vision and recast it really so that it could survive the ages. He's known in the Franciscan order as the second founder, because it was he who took this chaos of Francis, really, and imposed a certain order on it, who made it an institution so that it was hardy enough to move forward.
And truly, that's so much that we have him to attribute to. Before we dive deeper into his intellectual contribution, Mike, I wonder if you could just share with us his background, the historical background of the time, his own life.
Well, you know, his life just slightly overlapped with that of St. Francis. Bonaventure was born somewhere in the range of 1217 to 1221, and we don't know a lot about his childhood. His father, it seems, was a man of means, perhaps a doctor. They're living in Italy, and he grew up in a devout home. He was a brilliant young man, so brilliant that he was sent away to Paris to do his studies, and he was there at the same time as Thomas Aquinas. Now, Thomas was a member of the new Dominican order. Okay, this was brand new. This idea of a mendicant order. These friars who begged for their living, but were totally committed to Jesus Christ in a very public way.
Right.
And so Thomas was there at the same time as Bonaventure, and they did their studies at the same time. Bonaventure entered the Franciscan order shortly after he got there, and he did his studies under a man who was just entering the Franciscan order, Alexander of Hales, one of the great minds of his time. And so he was really in there at the founding of a new way of Franciscanism, this integration of the intellectual component into Franciscan life, which before then had been pretty spontaneous, pretty freewheeling. And Francis was a genius. He was a creative genius. And if you've ever worked with a creative genius, you know that they introduce a note of chaos into everything because they defy the categories that have been established.
Right.
Francis was that kind of guy, and he tended to attract, men like him. Now, what happens though is that those people aren't necessarily spiritual geniuses the way Francis was, right? They're not necessarily at that level of holiness, and so they get crazy ideas. And Bonaventure was of the generation of the fallout from that, really. Francis had been dead sometime. He died when Bonaventure was in early childhood, probably about 10 years old. And so Bonaventure found himself coming of age and in the order at the time that things were beginning to seem to fall apart. Right? There were factions in the order, and there were ideas taking hold that were not Francis's ideas, but they seemed to be a development, perhaps, of Francis's ideas, but they were taking hold, and they were making people a little crazy. So he was born into a difficult time, no doubt about it. Interesting times, as they say in the old curse, right?
And those interesting times paved the way for, like you mentioned, some of the greatest theological heritages that we have today. And like you mentioned, the structuring of the school of scholasticism. Can you help us understand what that was, what they were trying to achieve, and why we owe so much thanks to them?
Well, they wanted a full integration of faith and reason, and you find this in the works of Thomas, and you find this in the works of Bonaventure. They had different styles of doing it. Thomas tended to focus on God, the mystery of God, the triune God. Bonaventure tended to focus on the person of Jesus Christ, God incarnate. And so they had different emphases. Bonaventure also privileged the emotions and the affective life in a way that Thomas did not. So they were very different men, but they were friends. They were classmates, and they worked together to defend certain new ideas in religious life against fierce opposition, because the secular clergy were opposing their ideas about poverty, saying that this was a break with tradition in the church, this idea of absolute poverty and dependence on charity in the mendicant orders. So Thomas and Bonaventure together had to defend this new way of life in the Dominicans and the Franciscans, defended against these attacks, and eventually, they would have to continue their defense because the attacks continued.
Yep. And as we talked about those attacks continuing, they developed this wondrous systematic way of thinking about the faith. And obviously Aquinas' system is one that's most known, but share with us about how both of them lent disparate views into a complementary approach.
Well, it's as I said before. They had certain notes of style that you can detect in their work, but they were both concerned about the integration of faith and reason, and they both thought that you could wrestle with ideas and you could consider, you can test them and take them up and challenge them and come out the other side. You could have an open discussion about these things, and that the truth could take it. It's very interesting that Thomas Aquinas takes on the heresies of church history one by one, And it's often said by historians that if you want to find the best and strongest arguments in favor of the heresies, you'll find them in Thomas Aquinas' works, because he believed that you have to make the other person's argument as strong as possible before you take it down, right? You want to be going after your opponents at their best in order to vindicate the truth. You don't want to weaken the arguments by mocking them or by reducing them to absurdity or anything like that. So it's a sturdy and kind of rugged way of approaching truth, especially religious truth. And again, you find that in both men.
And in exploring, like you mentioned, what both men had to contribute, we can also consider, therefore, the ecclesial turbulence of the time, the growing tensions between the church and secular powers. We'll continue this conversation on the other side of the break with Mike Aquilina. We're talking about the historical and theological heritage of St. Bonaventure and the wondrous seraphic heritage he left behind for us that we need to keep scratching the surface of and getting deeper. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
The following program is brought to you in part by MyCatholicWill.com. Surveys show that more than half of Americans do not have a will. At MyCatholicWill.com, it takes as little as 15 minutes to write your will and secure a legacy of faith. MyCatholicWill.com is the exclusive online destination for creating a Catholic will. The process of writing a will is simple and now more accessible than ever. MyCatholicWill.com, a legacy of faith for those you love.
You like pizza? Me too. And for that, we can thank our friend, Tom Monahan. First, he starts with $900 and opens one pizza shop. Then it's worldwide, thousands of shops. But all this was just a warm-up for his greatest achievement yet. He built a university.
God inspired Tom to build up generations of men and women who have a hunger to reach the world for Christ. This place is Ave Maria University.
Visit avemaria.edu to see what's next.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
You remember the time I said on the air, go to confession. And when you're done, go out and have a big ice cream soda. Celebrate. And a man wrote to me, he says, you know, I hadn't gone to confession in 30 years. Do you mind if I went and had a pizza? I said, oh, have 20 pizzas.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Dr. Ray Guarendi. Two of the hardest words to say in the English language. I'm sorry. I'll ask couples, when was the last time you said I'm sorry? I think it was our wedding rehearsal dinner. I spilled some coffee on her lap. I said, hey, sorry about that. Why is I'm sorry so hard to say? What does it mean to you? Are you saying you're a failure? Are you saying I'm wrong? Are you saying if I say I'm sorry, I'm admitting it's all my fault? I'm sorry are two of the softest words in a relationship in the English language. I'm sorry, very hard to say, very easy on relationships. Strained or broken relationships are a given in most of our lives. Friends fall away, siblings drift apart, children sever ties with their parents, and despite our best efforts, these painful fissures are difficult to mend. Hi, I'm Dr. Ray. If you want to learn how to communicate better with the difficult people in your life and be a more easygoing, more forgiving person, check out my book, How to Get Along with Almost Everybody. Check it out, and all my other books on the store page at AveMariaRadio.net. That's AveMariaRadio.net.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm speaking with Mike Aquilina, author of several books, contributing editor to Angelus News, and he's hosted 11 series on EWTN, executive vice president of the St. Paul Center. We're talking about the heritage of St. Bonaventure. So, Mike, when we last left off, we started talking about how Bonaventure's approach, like Aquinas's, was a synthesis between faith and reason. Can you talk about how they differed?
Well, as I said before, I'm no expert in this area. I'm not a theologian or a philosopher, but I do know from reading that there is a difference in their approaches to God. You can say that Thomas puts the triune mystery front and center, and in Bonaventure you'll find an emphasis on Christ, the person of Jesus Christ, God incarnate. You'll also find an emphasis on the emotions and on the affective life that's absent in Thomas, but it's very strong in Bonaventure. I shouldn't say it's absent in Thomas, but it's certainly not emphasized as it is in Bonaventure. And you can see why Bonaventure would be drawn in these areas. One is that Francis was. Francis had a rich affective life. He gave free rein to his emotions. And in the generation of Bonaventure, there were Franciscans, there were followers of Francis who wanted to do the same. They wanted to experience the same kind of freedom, and they began to believe that they were living in the end times. There was this kind of new eschatology that was arising among Franciscans at the time, and they thought that a new age was dawning on the world that would continue until the end of history. And it was the age of the Spirit, and that they were part of it. They were at the forefront of it, and it really did begin to cause chaos. One of their beliefs was that there would be no more use for the church or institutional structures or sacraments or anything like that. They could just be free in the Spirit, and you can see how this would cause havoc. And it did. And the Minister General of the order in Bonaventure's time was even sympathetic to these people and was kind of a closet believer in their ideas. And the Pope asked for his resignation, and Bonaventure succeeded this Minister General. And Bonaventure, it was who had to bring about reconciliation, right? Not alienating these people, but correcting them and letting them know where they were wrong, and to bring them back into the fold in a good way. He really was a master of this kind of dialogue, and eventually, the Pope would corral him into applying that to the church at large in attempting to reconcile the Greek and Latin churches, which had been estranged for a couple of centuries at that point. So we find these great gifts of that are really distinct in Bonaventure were of great use to the church, and especially of great use to the Franciscan order.
Mike, as you've been sharing that with us, one of the things I'd like to ask if you could do is also to tell our listeners why the Albigensian heresy, the Catharism, that dualism, it was so dangerous to the Christian revelation.
Oh yes, well, because it's this heresy that persists. It keeps on coming back down through history, and it's a denial of the idea that creation is good. It's a revival of this ancient Gnosticism that hates the world God created. and it sees the world as something that's a detriment, that's a drag on us, that traps us. And the Albigensian heresy was so successful, especially in parts of France, that it was persuading people to commit suicide, just to get out of the world, to get out of the body, to get away from material reality, from matter, which they saw as a trap. So it was very dangerous. It wasn't just, oh, this is an idea that'll lead you away from going to church or anything like that. It was way beyond that. It was poisoning people's minds. It was poisoning people's souls. It was dragging them not only out of the church, but out of this life,
right?
And getting them to reject this life. It was an insidious thing, and the Franciscans and the Dominicans both affirmed the goodness of creation, and I think it was providential that the mendicant orders arose when they did.
I couldn't agree more, and the heritage that we owe to their stalwart preaching, both in terms of fervor, but also in terms of the intellectual soundness. They combated error, and we don't see the Albigensian heresy alive and well today. But if you could comment on how dualism still shows its ugly face in the secular sphere today.
This is something that Pope Francis actually identified early in his papacy, in a kind of Gnosticism that just rears its head every now and then, and we find it in the New Age movement today. This idea that what we see in the material world is merely an illusion. I mean, that might work in a system like Buddhism, but it doesn't work if you're a Christian believer. This material world is one created by God, and it's created for us. It's created to serve us. It's created to delight us, and we are given mastery over it, and we're to work it and make it fruitful. This will come back, I think, in some form in every age to varying degrees. And it's something that we always have to be on guard against. It's something that we always have to fight, because sometimes life is hard, and we can blame the material world on our troubles, and we can cease to see that this is a gift from God, that our circumstances, where we find ourselves today, that's part of our vocation, and God calls us to these times. We're talking about Bonaventure, and we're talking about Thomas Aquinas, and these men lived in what we today call the High Middle Ages.
Right.
Well, they probably looked out on their times and their world, and they saw a place that was very much in need of healing. They didn't know these were the High Middle Ages. What they knew was that their society, their culture, needed a revival. Right. And that's what the rise of the mendicant orders was all about. That's what Francis of Assisi wanted. He wanted to rebuild God's church, right? That was his mission. And they saw that need out there. Well, when we look out on our world today, we see the same need, and we can't despair because the need is there. We need to respond heroically, as they did, because we might be living in High Middle Ages and not even realize it. And I'm certain that they didn't realize that they were living in what one author has called the greatest of centuries. The 13th, the greatest of centuries, is the title of a book on my shelves here. They didn't know they were living in the greatest of centuries. They knew the challenges of their time, and they found them daunting, but they knew that they had been created and called for that particular time. We've got to come to the same realization ourselves about our times and pray that we can face it with the same kind of intelligence, with the same kind of devotion, with the same kind of charity that these men had.
Right. Now, you're a real student of especially the early church and the early church fathers. I want to ask if you could shed light on how much of an influence Augustine had on doing exactly that on Bonaventure and even Aquinas.
Well, Augustine is the dominant influence in Bonaventure's life. In his thought, I should say. Francis would be the dominant influence in his life, but Augustine is the great mind behind Bonaventure's. In the same way that Aristotle is behind Thomas. It's interesting that both Bonaventure and Thomas shared so many influences. Augustine is one. Thomas quotes Augustine more than any other saint outside the authors of sacred scripture, and especially Dionysius the Areopagite. Both drew a lot from Dionysius, his metaphysics, and his doctrine of the angels and his doctrine of hierarchy. All of these ideas show up in both Thomas and Bonaventure. Bonaventure is the one who's usually described as Augustinian and Platonic in a way that Thomas was not. Bonaventure leans into Plato the way Thomas leans into Aristotle. That's an overly simplified way of looking at it, but I think it's true.
And as we consider that, as you mentioned, you brought up Pseudo-Dionysius. Can you tell us about why Bonaventure is remembered? So we remember Thomas as the angelic doctor and Bonaventure as the seraphic doctor. Could you tell us about the angelic hierarchies that both these men did?
Where do we begin? Well, the hierarchy is a hierarchy of service, right? And what we find as the key to hierarchy is not that power is dominant over all, but service is dominant over all. Our Lord said He came not to be served, but to serve, right? And we're supposed to follow that model. And in the church's hierarchy, that's the rule. That's why Pope Gregory the Great called himself the servant of the servants of God, which all of the popes since him have taken as their own motto, right? That to be the servants of the servants of God. It works the same way in the angelic hierarchy. Those who have the greater gifts are there in service of those spirits who have the lesser gifts. And all of them really are in service of God's people on earth. That's what St. Paul talks about in Galatians 4, that these custodians from the Old Testament are now our servants. They're here at our service. And that's a remarkable thing to think about. Bonaventure got the name of the seraphic doctor after the seraphim, these great spiritual beings who are there at the throne of heaven in the presence of God, and they have such rarefied minds, such purified minds, and he was named after them. And I think it's because he has not only the intellect, but
Mike,
also...
we have to stop there. Mike Aquilina, thank you so much.